Hello, my name is Kelly Tebow, and I'm with the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders. I will be your organizer for this evening and would like to welcome you to our webinar on Parent Power, 5 Parenting Strategies to Improve Your Home. Thank you all for joining us. Before I have my colleague introduce the speaker for tonight, I'm going to cover some housekeeping items with you. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please type it in the bottom of your question box and click send. You may send questions during the webinar. However, we will have Dr. Mizrell answer the questions at the end of his presentation. We will get to as many queries as time allows. And in addition, tonight's presenter will be able to take your questions on the Wednesday webinar blog, which is accessed from our homepage under the heading Programs. This blog will be monitored for the next 7 days. Feel free to look and post questions as often as you like. Answers will be archived for future reference. If you missed part of the presentation or would like to watch it again, an archived version will be posted to the website shortly. We value your input, and in order to expand the webinar experience in the future, we need everyone to fill out the survey as you exit the webinar. The New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders and its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of the information presented on our site. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any member or physician, nor do we advocate any treatment. You are responsible for your own medical decisions. Now, I'm going to turn over the introduction of our speaker to Martha Butterfield, the webinar coordinator of NJCTS. Marty?
Thanks, Kelly, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's presentation. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I would like to remind you of a couple of things coming up in our calendar. This Saturday, November 4th at 2 p.m. in Teaneck, New Jersey, we will be moderating a panel discussion before the showing of the independent film Swim Team. This is a heartfelt documentary about a swim team whose members are teens and young adults with autism. Then on November 18th in Bergen County, New Jersey, we are sponsoring a New Jersey Walks for TS 5K event. Registration opens at 7 a.m. I hope that some of you will be able to join us for one or both of these events. For those of you not in the area, I ask that you visit our website and make a donation in support of our educational outreach programming. Registration and details for both these events, as well as how to donate, are available on our website. Now to the introduction of tonight's presenter, Dr. Justin Mizrell. Dr. Mizrell is the clinical director at the New Jersey site of New York University's Child Studies Center, which is located in Hackensack, New Jersey. Dr. Mizrell is a recognized expert on the evaluation and treatment of child and adolescent behavior disorders. He received his undergrad degree from Rutgers University in New Jersey and his graduate degree from Fordham University in New York. This is Dr. Mizrell's second appearance on our Wednesday webinar series. His first presentation was on May 17, 2017, where he presented on the technique he co-developed called game-based cognitive behavior therapy. This is an integrative and trans-diagnostic approach for addressing childhood trauma. That webinar, along with all of our webinars, are available for download on our website. Dr. Mizrell, we are delighted to have you back. And now, without further introduction, I'll turn tonight's webinar over to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me again. And thank you to NJCTS for organizing these webinars. I find that they're very informative and useful. Tonight's presentation is on parent power, and this is a workshop and a webinar that I've developed in my practice at NYU, and it's designed in order to really help parents and other caregivers to think of very specific strategies that they can focus on when helping their children with a variety of behavioral problems. The word power in parent power stands for, and it's an acronym, and it stands for specific steps in this procedure that we're going to walk through one by one. And everything that I'm presenting today is really things that have techniques and strategies for working with children that have been around for years, if not decades. And there's nothing really new under the sun in what I'm showing you. However, the presentation and the way in which we're trying to package it is hopefully going to be in a more succinct and efficient way for people at home to really utilize these strategies and really stick to them to get better outcomes at home. So we're going to walk through them, and a few things before I dive into it to mention is that a lot of the examples that I might reference are geared more for like elementary school age children and maybe middle school age children. However, these principles definitely apply to children as old as high school, and there may be questions that you're having at home pertaining to your situation that I may not get to, and so I encourage you definitely to post those questions at the end, and hopefully we'll have time to gather into all that, as well as on the blog after the webinar is finished. Okay, so let's get into the presentation. So children can be scary. Now I have this slide here because it reminds me that when we're working with children, a lot of times as the adults, as the caregivers, we're unsure of what to do. You know, there's a lot of times when we tell our kids, you know, we need you to brush your teeth, we need you to get ready for school, and they're not doing what we want them to do. And there's a point in which, you know, the oppositionality of a kid, or the refusal to cooperate from the child, or just the lack of connection or the resistance really can be very frightening. You know, I have this slide kind of just to get a chuckle, get a laugh, but it is pointing to a deeper truth, which is a lot of times we just don't know what to do, and we don't know how to handle these situations. And I can speak to this as a professional who does this as a living, as well as a father, that there are plenty of times when I don't know what to do, either in session or at home. So I want you to understand you're not alone. This is a very normal parenting experience. When we're in these situations, there are many common disruptive behaviors that we may encounter when we're raising children. Defiance, as I had mentioned before, so when we're telling our kids to do something and they're not doing it, they're not getting ready for school, or they're not you know, sitting with us and eating, and not putting away their phones. Back talking, which includes things like being disrespectful or even cursing or saying things with a negative attitude, a bad attitude. Temper tantrums, which are certainly very common among younger children, and in older children it can manifest in terms of a meltdown or just an angry argument that's filled with a lot of hostility. Certainly fighting with siblings and peers is a common problem that really stresses parents out. It's very difficult to see your children who, you know, you love both of your children or more of your, you know, all of your children, and when you see them fighting with each other and having such conflict, it's very hard for parents to see that. School refusal is another issue a lot of times that people have to deal with. I'm seeing this more and more at our practice at the Child Studies Center. You know, there's a lot of anxiety wrapped up into school these days, and there's a lot of school avoidance. And as this problem, you know, gets bigger, it's going to be impacting a lot of families, and parents are kind of stuck not knowing what to do. And there are many more situations that I'm sure you can think of. You know, when we have kids that are struggling, and this is in particular with children who have mental health difficulties, such as the kids that I see who have significant anxiety disorders or ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder, but it doesn't just have to be those children. It could also be any kids who are just dealing with the normal stressors of everyday life. You know, when they are having these difficulties and they are giving us such resistance and presenting all these challenges, it can make us really feel very stressed out. They have a tremendous impact on parents and caregivers. It causes frustration. You know, it's certainly true that if your kids are having difficulties, it can impact your quality of life. It could impact the quality of your marriage or your significant relationships. It could really be a major drag on your overall lifestyle. Exhaustion and fatigues can set in if you are constantly worried about your kids and you're having so much a hard time and they're not doing what we want them to do. Stress and anxiety can also impact us. And oftentimes when we are experiencing all these difficulties as parents and caregivers, we may look to compensate by, you know, engaging in unhealthy behaviors to counteract it, like drinking too much or eating too much junk food, or just giving into our anger and not really being there and being available in the way that we need to be for our kids. These are all very common things. Raising children is among the most difficult and challenging things that anybody has to do, and also perhaps the most important and most meaningful. So it's really, you know, incumbent upon us to take it very seriously and to think about it strategically. So we need the power to help our children to reach their potential. And that's where the parent power model comes into play. So the parent power model consists of 5 steps, each one building upon the other. And the first step in the power model is P, standing for put structures in place. The P in power stands for put structures in place. Now, what do I mean by structures? Well, what we mean by structures is setting behavioral expectations. So essentially, we want to think about, when we're thinking about our homes, is what are the behaviors that I'm looking for? What am I expecting of my children? These are the things that we want to encourage, and think of them as goals, things that we want them to build for and work for. And I recommend really creating goals and kind of like house rules, and really defining it in a positive direction. So rather than saying don't do this, don't do that, we want to say do this and do that. Saying it in an affirmative is a lot easier for kids to understand, and it's easier for us to stick to. So for example, the examples I have up here: follow directions, control your body, be polite, for instance. And these are the 3, what I call the 3 golden rules of behavior management, because any behavior infraction can fall into one of these 3 buckets. So if a child is not doing what we're asking them to do, and if they're not being cooperative, they're not following directions. If they're up and down or pushing their sibling, they're not controlling their body. If they are being rude and they're back talking, they're not being polite. So these are all very positive goals that are very broad, and they cover a lot of different things. On the right hand of these dashes, you'll see other ways of saying the same thing. You could always modify the language to suit your needs. You could say be responsible. If this works for teenagers and high school students, be responsible. Actively participate, meaning engaging in school, doing your homework. Being respectful, so using kind words, using polite manners, showing good sportsmanship. That all goes into that. To really describing and expressing the behavior expectations that you have for your children and for your family is incredibly important. That's really the building block upon which the rest of this structure is going to be placed. Other parts of putting structures in the home include scheduling. So when we look at families where there's an incredible amount of dysfunction, when there is scheduling irregularities, when there is a lot of unpredictability and lack of knowing when something is going to happen, and people are eating dinners at different times and not together, and that, you know, every week and every after school and weekend time is all different, and there's a very little understanding of what's to come next. That could create a lot of stress and anxiety for children. And when we look at families where there's been abuse and neglect and maltreatment, we certainly see that those families tend to have a lot of dysfunction, a lot of chaos. And one of the hallmark characteristics is a lack of structure, a great degree of unpredictability. So what I recommend in terms of taking control of your home is building in schedule. And this is very important. A lot of parents of young children get this already, because in order for you to survive effectively, you've got to have your kids on a schedule. But this is not to be overlooked. It's not trivial. So when we're talking about scheduling, you know, there should be a schedule for the weekday, knowing like pretty much what time people are waking up. Try to get up at the same time, thereabouts, every day. You know, have routines for the morning, have routines for the after school, routines in the evening. These things are very helpful for kids because they know what to expect. And in the evening routines, if you have like strategies such as reading a book or singing a song, if they're younger kids, of putting them to bed, or with the older kids having a rule where they have to shut down the electronics an hour before bedtime, these are all very helpful. For the weekends, it's good to have activities that you plan to do together as a family, and also have structured activities like sports and after school activities. These are things that really, you know, help kids to make new friends and to learn new skills. And with the scheduling over the weekend, we want to make sure that kids are not like staying up an hour later than they do normally, or sleeping in more than an hour than they do normally on the weekends, because that could kind of disjoint things for throughout the week. We want to kind of keep kids as regulated and as routine as we can. One thing to mention about overscheduling, that's something that's been in the news a lot, and a lot of parenting blogs, people worried about overscheduling and how that's affecting kids, and kids not having enough time for play and that sort of thing. My professional opinion about this, now again, I see families who have kids with mental health problems. And when I see those kids, my greater concern is not that they're overscheduled. It's usually that they're not engaging in enough. They're underscheduled. And what I would usually recommend is, work with the kid, find things that they like to do, find after school activities that they enjoy engaging in, and then help them make that commitment to do those things. Because in my experience, if there's not something on the calendar, if there's not something scheduled, then in today's day and age, the kids are on their iPods, they're on their iPads, they're on their phone, they're on their electronics, and there's really nothing that beneficial to being on the electronics. There's maybe like not much harm can come of it, but there's no developmental benefit from it. So what I find is that if you do schedule, if you have your kids schedule out with a lot of activities, you guys just take the temperature. Like if you feel your kid is too stressed out or too overburdened with it, or if you're making them do things for the wrong reason, then maybe you got to check that. But in general, and the literature really supports this, after school activities, extracurricular activities are definitely good for kids and their development, because it helps them build new skills, it helps them build up self-esteem and make new friends. So these are all parts of putting structures in place at home. Moving along, we have the next step in the parent power sequence, O, for offer incentives. Now, by offering incentives, we're really talking about positive reinforcement. Now, positive reinforcement is what we call in the behavioral sciences, it's the most effective behavior change strategy. So more than using punishments like threatening or taking things away, those things are necessary, consequences are necessary, but the best way to actually teach and have someone learn and change their behavior is through the use of positive reinforcement. And positive reinforcement can come in many different ways. It can be something as simple as just giving praise, verbal praise. It's the most common form of positive reinforcement. In fact, what we talk about in behavior therapy is positive labeled praise, and that's simply saying your kid's name, getting their attention. So let's say, Johnny, you're doing a great job following directions. So just being very specific, saying their name, getting their attention, telling them what they're doing that is good, and giving them praise for that. So that's positive labeled praise. That's something that's incredibly powerful and often overlooked. Kids are so hungry for our positive affection and positive attention. They really want us to be proud of them. They are really seeking our approval by and large. And just by doing those simple things, really catching them being good in the moment and giving them that praise makes a tremendous difference. If you want to go the extra mile beyond just praise, then you develop a reward system to really bring out the best in your kids. And how could you do that? Well, I'm going to talk about ways of creating a reward system. So the first thing I would recommend is linking the reward system to the house rules. The house rules can be the behavior expectations that we talked about in the put structures in place slide. So for instance, your house rules might be follow directions, control your body, be polite. And you could say every time we see you doing those things, we're going to say great job following directions, and we're going to give you a point for that. And those points can then be added up into the system for certain rewards. What will those rewards be? What would those incentives be? Well, you got to identify the meaningful incentives. And this is something that's got to be decided on by the parents as well as the child in collaboration. When you have a young child, they might work for things like stickers or Pokemon cards. Well, if you're working with a teenager in high school, they don't really care about Pokemon cards and stickers. They might be working for something else, like time on their iPad or time playing on the Xbox. So whatever it is, it needs to be something that is actually meaningful for that person. There's no like one-size-fits-all reward system that's going to work for all families and for all children. The way I kind of frame it is in talking about this reward system is like working to earn a paycheck. A lot of times parents will say, hey, you're telling us basically to bribe our kids, and they're not, they should know that they got to go to school. They should know that they've got to do their homework. I don't want to have to give them any rewards or incentives for that. That's like I'm bribing them. And what I'll say to that is, you know what? It's not really bribery. When you go to work, you're working for a paycheck. Is your employer bribing you to get to work? No, they're not bribing you to go to work. They are paying you for the work that you're doing. They are paying you for what you've earned. Similarly with the kids, they're working for an incentive. You're not bribing them. A bribe would be like giving them ice cream and saying, tomorrow I want you to be very well behaved, and that's why I'm giving you this now. Bribery is really putting the reinforcement before the behavior. And when we're earning it, just like when we're going to work to earn our paycheck, we have to do the behavior first, and then we get the reward. So it's definitely not bribery. It's certainly more like rewarding for hard work, and that's a value that we want to teach all of our kids. We discussed describing and labeling desired behaviors. Very important to be very concrete and specific. So when we're giving the positive label phrase, we're saying exactly what it is that we're happy to see. And that way there's no ambiguity and no confusion on the part of our children. And also we want to praise the effort rather than the attributes. What do I mean by that? So if you have a kid who is working very hard, and let's say you have a child who is not so good at math, maybe they have a math learning disability of some sort, and they really struggle in it, but they work really hard, they do their homework, they study hard, I would praise that child profusely, and I would be more proud of that child than I would be of the child who is naturally gifted at math, but just cruises by and gets good grades based on their natural abilities. Because the thing that's going to make a difference in this child's development and in the long run of that person's life is how well they work hard, how much effort they put in a given situation. You can't really choose what attributes you're born with, or what skill, what talents and what abilities you're born with, but you can choose how hard you work at it. And that's the life lesson. That's the life lesson that's going to bring success later on. So we try to really reinforce effort. Similarly, and people bring this up, what do you think about, saying that your daughter or your daughter is so beautiful and making such a big fuss about their external attributes and that kind of thing. And I agree. That's not where we should be putting things. We should say, other things like, if you're working really hard on putting together your outfit, or you're working really hard to just be healthy and to eat well, and all these other things that go into being a healthy, vibrant young person, really focusing on what it is that's within that person's control. If you're talking to the kid about things that are outside their control, they kind of feel like, well, they're relatively helpless in making any difference on it. The only things that they really can change are the things that are under their control and under their power, and that's what we want to reinforce. And with that, here are some reward system examples. So here's what's called a fixed interval token economy. This is a behavioral term, meaning that at the end of a fixed time interval, we are going to assess somebody on certain categories and see whether or not they earn their reward. This chart that I have here is called the Star Rewards chart, and this is just an example that I have from the therapy that I do with younger children. This is for elementary school age children, like ages 4 to 10 or thereabouts. There you'll see the 3 golden rules: follow directions, control your body, and be polite. At the end of the therapy session, I'll say, did you follow directions? Did you control your body? Were you polite? And if they did each of those, they'll get a star for each one. If they get all 3 stars, then they get a trip to the prize box that I have in my room. And the prize box just has like little tchotchkes from like the dollar store, that kind of thing. So this is one way you can do a token economy. I wouldn't recommend you doing this at home per se, because at home, it's not really sustainable for you to always be getting prizes and to be going to the dollar store all the time or going to the toy store all the time. And after a while, if it's not sustainable, if you're not going to be consistent with it, it's not going to really make a difference. So what I usually say is do something a little bit more flexible. This is a more flexible and more sustainable way to go, in my opinion. So this is called the variable ratio token economy. What variable ratio means is that a kid's going to respond, they're going to show the behavior, the positive behavior, and you're going to try to catch them doing that positive behavior as often as you can. Now, in this system I have also in therapy, it's called the super check system. And here's a sample copy of the super check tally chart that we use in the therapy. And this is again for elementary school age kids. The basic idea does work for elementary as well as middle school. So again, you're still thinking about your 3 target behaviors. Remember the 3 behavioral expectations of follow directions, control your body, and being polite. Every time we're seeing the child doing those things, following directions, controlling your body, being polite, we're going to say, great job following directions, and then coupling that positive praise with a super check. So great job following directions, you're going to get a super check. And then we put a check mark on that one of those horizontal lines. If you see on the one column, it's a session number. Those just correspond to the number session that we're in therapy. So I might put a date in, like November 1st, 2017, and then we work across horizontally. Every time I see them doing a good job, they get those super checks. At the end of the session, if they've got all their super checks, they get to cash that in for for free playtime was what we call it. So they get a chance to earn a to play a game that they want to play. And this is something that's motivating for the younger kids because they want to be able to be successful, they want to show that they can do it, and they want to be able to pick the game. In a group therapy environment, we will have them work for what's called super bucks. It's the same idea where every time we see them doing a good job, we'll say, great job, do you get a super buck? A super buck is just like Monopoly money that goes into their bank, their super buck bank, which can be like an envelope or a shoebox. You can be creative with it. And all those get counted up, and then the child in the group who has the most super bucks for that day, that session, will get the super prize, which is like a little bit higher ordered or more desirable prize from the prize box. So these are just examples of how to do it. What I would recommend doing at home is doing something that's more similar to the super check system, where every time you see your kid, you say you're going to get super checks, or you could get points. You could call them super checks or points, it doesn't really matter. And what you want to do is find some way of tallying it, either writing it down on a piece of paper. You could use your phone and enter it into your phone, or if you're good at it, you can keep it in your head. And then what you say to them is that as you accumulate these points, you can cash them in for time, earning a privilege. And the most common privilege that I suggest using, or the best privilege I recommend using, is really screen time, because that's kind of like a frivolous pursuit that you can give and take with impunity. And if you want to give your child a chance to earn up to, like, say, 60 minutes of screen time, be it the phone or the iPad or TV, they can earn it. And every time they get a point, that could be worth 1 minute of the time that they can be spending on the screen time. A lot of times families will say, well, they're already getting all the screen time. How am I going to justify this kind of system? And I'll say, well, we got to take the screen time and say, now, I know you've been getting it for free, but now we got to make it dependent on whether or not you've earned it. And the way to earn it is by showing these different behaviors. The system is really designed to help make you a participant in motivating the positive behavior in your child's life. And so if you're in a situation where you have this, you could say, listen, if your kid's not doing such a good job or struggling or having a tantrum, you say, listen, I know you're having a hard time right now, but I want you to earn your super checks, or I want you to earn your points. I want you to be able to earn your time. And right now you're not getting it right now, so we need to get back on track. It gives you a position so that you're just saying, I'm rooting for you to earn your privilege, I'm rooting for you to earn your reward, rather than what tends to happen, which is where we say, stop doing this, stop doing that, I'm going to have to take away your privileges. If you keep this up, I'm going to take away your phone. If you're just in this kind of situation where all you're doing is being reactive and focusing on the negative and what you're going to take away, it puts you in a less optimal situation. Okay, so moving on to the W in the parent power sequence. W standing for work hard. And the work hard part of parent power seems like the most trivial and the most obvious, but it's also perhaps the most important, because it can't be understated. In order for these techniques to work, you've got to be consistent in everything that you do. You can't just try it for one day and then assume it's going to sink in. And so many times I'll speak to parents and they'll say, oh, I've done behavior therapy before, I've done the charts, I've done the sticker charts, I've done the positive reinforcement. It works for a little bit and then it stops, and then they don't care anymore. Well, usually it stops working when the consistency falls away. If you're consistently sticking to it, and your kids start really have a lot of credibility in what you're saying and believe that unless they are actually doing what you need them to do, they're not going to be earning their privileges. If they're not earning it, they're not getting what they want. If they really believe that you're saying what you mean and you're sticking to your guns, they're going to comply. They're going to tend to move to get more in line with this stuff. And it's really can't be understated. You got to work hard. You got to give it a try, and you got to stick to it. You can't just give it up after a week or two. You also got to really practice giving the praise for the positive behavior. Get in the habit of noticing the desirable behaviors, noticing it in your children and the people around you. You have to really train yourself. It's kind of counterintuitive. Like as a parent, it's the natural way usually is, hey, when the kids are doing everything they're supposed to be doing, we say, oh, thank goodness, and we just kind of take a break. And then when they are acting up, that's when we say, hey, stop, what are you doing? Knock it off. And that's a very natural parenting response, but it's actually the opposite of what we want to do. We actually want to be giving positive attention and praise when they're doing the right thing. So your kids are quietly doing their homework and say, you're doing a really great job doing your homework. I'm very proud of you right now, rather than just ignoring them and leaving it alone. We need to be giving that positive feedback to them. But it really takes retraining our brains to catch them being good and to giving them that feedback. Then that takes a lot of work. Planning ahead, planning for challenges. Like if you're going to go on a long car ride, or if you're going to go to the restaurant or some kind of family event or other kind of event, and you really can't get out of it, and you got to have the kids there, you got to think ahead. How are you going to keep them occupied? When are you going to do it? If you have younger kids, is it going to be after nap time? Are you going to have them, give them snacks so that they're not super hungry, so that you could kind of satiate them a little bit? Are you going to make sure that their routine isn't too disrupted so that they are not irritable or agitated? These are all things you got to really think ahead and resist as much as you can just winging it and just doing it flying by the seat of your pants, because those things tend to have negative outcomes. Sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes you got to be kind of flexible and improvise, but it really should be, that should really be the exception. The rule should be that you are planning ahead and scheduling things and bringing your snacks and bringing your activities to occupy the kids and all that. And that takes tremendous work and tremendous commitment. Setting up your children by minding the schedule, I kind of hinted at before. You need to, think ahead, not getting things disrupted. If your kids are going to be really tired, or you're going to go out, you have younger kids and you're going to go out to eat, and it's going to creep into the time when they're usually going to bed, you're going to expect that there's going to be possibly or very likely a bad outcome from that. So just got to, plan accordingly. You got to prepare your incentives in advance. If you're going to have a token economy system or reward system, make sure that you have everything that you need before you roll it out. Because if you just kind of talk about it and you just kind of wing it without having everything ready, it's going to jeopardize the credibility of your system. Your kids are going to look at you and be like, well, what do you mean? You said I was going to have iPad time, but you don't even have an iPad yet. Or you said you get prizes from me or Pokemon cards, but you don't even have this stuff yet. Make sure you have everything ready and that you can give them what you're saying you're going to give them. In terms of the other incentives, and this is kind of a side note, I would stay away from like really big ticket item things. Like if you say, hey, if you're good for this whole week or this whole month, I'm going to get you tickets to a football game. If you're doing great for the whole school year, I'm going to get you a phone. Doing things that way, in my experience, kids, especially the younger ones, they can't hold it together that long. It's more of a daily thing, and that's where the daily work comes into play. So with using like the super check system, I would use a day by day, use it or lose it proposition, where the kids can start earning super checks right away, and if they use them, they use them. If they don't, they can't bank them for the next day because they got to start up at zero. If they're able to bank it, that's another problem, because then they have this huge bank of checks or points or whatever have you, and they feel like, oh, well, now I don't have to work so hard because I have all these points saved up that I can use for my reward or stuff I could use for my privileges, and they may be less motivated. So you got to keep them motivated, keep them hungry. Start them at zero every day and get them to get going as soon as they wake up and as soon as their feet hit the floor. But all this takes a lot of hard work because it's day in and day out. Building your charts, if you need to do the charts before you roll them out, is very important to do. Something that I should mention is that with the working hard, this is very challenging stuff. Changing behaviors with your kids, it requires a lot of coordination. It requires a lot of effort. You got to be on task a lot. This is extremely challenging in and of itself and in normal circumstances, but for families who have for single family households, single parent households, and other families where there's a lot of stress or other challenges, if there's illness in the family or other kinds of disabilities, and that these things can be even harder. And I say that because I want to acknowledge that all these techniques that we talk about in behavior therapy, they work in the abstract, they work in terms of research, but when they're put into practice, you really got to roll up the sleeves and make it happen. And sometimes you're going to mess up, sometimes it's not going to work out. And for those of us who have really stressed out and challenging life or family situations or family structures in like divorce or in remarriage situations, there's a lot of other cofactors that can complicate things. So I don't mean to give that short shrift or to overlook it. There's definitely a lot of situations where these techniques become very hard. But my recommendation, my strong recommendation, is don't lose heart. You got to keep trying at it, and things will start getting back on track. Remember, behavior transformation takes time. I usually use this metaphor. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And if you ever known someone to train for a marathon, if you train one from yourselves, you'll know, a marathon is 26.2 miles. That's a lot of miles to run in one shot. And in order to get ready for that, it takes a lot more than just going to the gym a couple times and running on the treadmill. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to go to the New York City Marathon. It's this weekend. It actually is this weekend. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to start training for it now. I'm going to run all week and then I'm going to do it on Sunday. It's not going to happen that way. It's something that takes months in advance. Usually it's like 3 months in advance of working it, day in and day out. Now, when you're training for a marathon, some days you don't make it to the gym. Some days you don't eat the right way. And that's okay. You just got to get back on track. It's the same thing with turning around behaviors with children and really transforming your household and transforming your family. It takes a long time. Some days you're going to mess up. You're going to be stressed out. You're going to have a bad day at work. You're going to have a fight with your spouse. You're going to be tired from lack of sleep, and you're going to be off your game. You're not going to be doing the best job you can. You may be a little bit less consistent, and that's okay to happen once in a while, all right? We've got to be easy on ourselves. But at the same time, we need to also pick ourselves back up and get back on it and get things on track. And just to know that this takes the consistency of working hard day in and day out to get us to the outcomes that we desire. Now, the E in Parent Power stands for emotional regulation. And I mean various things for this. What I'm really talking about is the emotional regulation for us, the parents, the caregivers. The first part of this, the first element of this is really self-care. And a lot of times I'll talk about self-care with my parents that I see in my practice, and they'll laugh and they'll say, how can I do self-care? I don't have the time for it. Everything's busy between work and kids and everything that's going on. And I'll say, hey, work-life balance. And people, again, they'll laugh at that and say, how can we possibly achieve this balance? Well, you know what? It is challenging. I'm not going to say that it isn't. But we do need to prioritize it and really understand what we're capable of, what we're able to do, what balance do we need in order to operate at our best. It is important to carve out free time to rejuvenate, not just for ourselves, but also with our spouses or our partners. Again, this is also extremely challenging if you are a single parent who has to work and has no other person really in the home to give you a break. That I give you is very hard. Self-care, very challenging to do indeed. But throughout, whatever you can, try to look for opportunities. If you can ask for help once in a while from either a babysitter or hopefully a relative or a family member or somebody in your neighborhood that could help out just to give you a break once in a while, and you can seek out certain things that are good for your mental health and mental well-being. Things like we have here, exercise, go to the gym, meditation, yoga, spa, going to therapy, getting support groups. These are all things that are incredibly important to maintaining our mental health. I'll tell my parents, if you don't have your mental health together, if you're not balanced, if you're not doing well in that way, you can't possibly be there for your kids. You can't be available for your kids. And we often overlook it when we're having kids with problems. We think, oh, the problems are all with the kid. We just need to fix them, put them into therapy and fix them. But really, when we're talking about young people, you can't just cleanly extract them from the family dynamic. And a big part of the puzzle is almost always the part that the parents and the caregivers have to play. And we can't, as therapists, really get the kids to where we need them to be without really good, strong buy-in from the parents. And part of that buy-in in helping them to work with their kids and improving the way their kids are doing at home is making sure that the parents themselves are doing well at their balance and that they are attending to their own mental health and well-being. It's really important, speaking of activities that enhance meaning and quality of life, not to ignore this sort of thing. If there are any religious or cultural groups or activities that you are engaged in, like going to church or synagogue or the mosque, or if you're involved in Boy Scouts or the Rotary Club or any of these groups, these are really important things. They're outlets, they're means of healthy expression, they're ways of tying bonds with other people in your neighborhood and in your community. You know, all the research that's coming out now is showing that the more social supports you have, the more connections you have in your community and with your family and with others, the happier or at least more meaningful you feel your life is. And these are all great protective factors, and these all also feed into helping your kids be the best that they can be. So whatever involvement you can have with in these ways, if you like to play sports and you want to join the soccer team, if you're, you know, they have adult soccer team, adult softball and baseball leagues, all these things are really good for your mental health, and they're also good for meeting other people who are, you know, parents and other people in the neighborhood and community who can give you support when you're in need. Another aspect of this that I want to mention is the importance of family cohesion. It's really important to have unity among parents when you're dealing with behavior problems in the home or issues with your children and issues with your family. If you're not on the same page regarding caregiving and parenting, you might want to try to work that out. If you can't work it out yourselves, you might want to seek help from someone like a therapist. It's very important that kids don't split parents. The parents are somewhat on the same page so that they can communicate the same messages. I also talk about formulating a vision for your family based on your values. Like, what do you think of when you think of your family? What do you value? Do you value, you know, achievement, hard work, compassion, community, faith, whatever it is that you really value as a family? Communicate that to your child. You should be saying, you know, these are things that we want from you. This is what we expect of you, and we're going to work with you to achieve these goals. So, you know, helping your kids feel like they're a part of a team and that there's a common mission that everyone's working for can really help increase the family cohesion. Cohesion really means like how much everyone feels connected to each other, how much they feel supportive of one another, and how interdependent everyone feels. And the greater cohesion you have, the greater outcomes you have regarding your relationships and your outcomes with your children and with your family. Grit and resilience is something to also mention. These are another concepts from the positive psychology world that are really gaining a lot of traction. And what this really speaks to is how children deal with when they encounter adversity. So it's the ability to persevere in the face of adversity. In order to do that, they often need caring parents and others to really be role models and really give them a lot of support when your kids are struggling or when they're suffering. You know, help them turn those situations into learning opportunities, telling them like, this is something that is causing you pain and discomfort right now, but if we just, you know, persevere, you're going to feel stronger for it. Like, let's say, for example, your kid really wants to get onto this basketball team and they get cut from the team and they're really upset. You know, this is a good opportunity to say, listen, that's all right. You're going to survive it. What can you do better for next time? And give them a lot of praise for showing the effort and going through it and going out for the team anyway, and encouraging them to keep working hard at it. These are all things that really feed into grit and resilience. Wise parenting is another thing the last thing I want to mention about this idea of family cohesion. So wise parenting refers to a parenting approach that encompasses warmth, which means, you know, emotional availability, how open you are to discussing different issues and feelings with your kids. Respectfulness, meaning how much do you respect your child's opinion and their point of view, how much do you validate them, and how much you show empathy towards them. And then the last element of it, which is demanding. So you're warm and approachable, you show the kids respect, but you're also demanding in that you have expectations that are reasonably high. You're not letting them just slack off in school and do whatever they want. You're not just letting them, you know, smoke pot or do whatever they want with their phones. If they're teenagers, you have expectations regarding how they should conduct themselves within the family, within the community, and within the school. So this is an important blend of attributes to have this wise parenting approach, but that's something also to keep in mind. And the last step in the parent power procedure is R, which stands for role modeling. And by role modeling, I'm talking about a role model who inspires others to be their best self. You know, we need to be respectful and fair with our kids. We can't just do things however we want and assume that our kids are going to listen to us. If we are going to yell, if we're going to curse, if we're going to be angry and lose control, we can't expect that our kids are going to be doing differently. So we need to be the change we want to see in our children. We also want to project calm and confidence. I say, put your game face on. So even if your kids are making you really crazy, if they're driving you up the wall, I say, you know what, try your best to keep that within. Try to take a deep breath, put your game face on. Don't show that it's having a major impact on you. Don't be reactive. You're going to be calm and you're going to be assertive. Being honest and true to your word is also critical. If you just say something but don't follow through, that's going to be a problem. It's one of the reasons why I recommend don't make big threats that you can't stick to. So like if you're going to Disney World or something like that, if you're going on a trip somewhere that you can't get out of, don't say, that's it, you're not going to go to the trip if you misbehave again, because you're not able to take that away. So if they do misbehave and you've already bought the tickets to Disney World, you're still going one way or the other, and now you've just lost credibility. So just be honest and true to your word. Only say things that you mean. Building relationships with your child is important. Talking to them and making sure that they understand you and that you have their back and they have yours is really important. There's a good quote by this coach, Dabo Sweeney, who was the coach for the Clemson Tigers that won the national championship last year, that goes that, rules without a relationship leads to rebellion. And I thought that was a really pertinent quote. It talks about if you just have harsh rules and you're like very strict, that's great. But if you don't have a relationship where the kids really feel connected to you and they really want to look up to you and make you proud, then you're not going to get as far with them as you want. And in the worst case scenarios, you're gonna actually turn them off and create a rebellion in your own home. We're going to do a role modeling exercise next. When I do this exercise, it's called Good Boss, Bad Boss. When I do this in the live workshops, I'll have people get together and discuss these attributes out loud. But for the sake of the webinar, I'll kind of summarize what sort of attributes we're looking at. With the Good Boss and Bad Boss exercise, I'll ask folks, think about the best boss you've ever had. It could be a boss you had in high school working in the summers, or your boss that you had in college, or as a career person, or whatever it is. Think about the attributes that person has, and then also think about the worst boss you've ever had in any of these circumstances, and think about their attributes. And when you think about the worst boss you've ever had, you tend to think about things like unpredictability, or irritability, or someone who gets angry very easily, someone who's impatient, someone who takes credit for things that you did and doesn't give the credit back, or someone who blames everybody else for mistakes that they made, never taking responsibility, never taking credit, someone who is overly critical and doesn't take the time to listen and doesn't take the time to be supportive and to be a mentor and to guide you. These are all typical examples of the bad boss. Now, on the other side, if we think about the good boss and what those attributes tend to be things like respect. They respect my feelings. They respect me as a person. Someone who is a role model, who takes the time to support me and to help generate my skills. Somebody who is taking responsibility for things that happen in our organization, someone who is very supportive and gives me a lot of positive feedback when I'm doing the right thing. These are the things that a good boss is. These are the things that I want to be as a person. And when I do this exercise, the point is to think about yourself as the boss. As the parent, you are the boss of your household. So what kind of boss do you want to be? Do you want to be the good boss, or do you want to be the bad boss? That is how our children are going to be looking at us. And that's why it's really important to think long and hard about this and to really embrace the attributes of the good boss. So this is bringing us to the end of the webinar. This is to recap for the parent power procedure. We have put structures in place, offer incentives, work hard, emotional regulation, and role modeling. All these steps in the procedure work together, one building upon the other. If you just do one but not the others, it's not going to be as effective. Each of these represent elements that are incredibly important for having positive, healthy outcomes with your children and your families. But they need to be done consistently, and you need to be doing them in tandem and all together. And to repeat kind of what I said before, there'll be some times when you're off track, sometimes when you have bad days, and that's normal. It's to be expected. You're human, and you're a human doing one of the most difficult, challenging, and meaningful tasks on this earth, which is raising children. And so that's to be understood. But if you do have a bad day, just brush yourself off and get back on track and get things going in the right direction again. So with that, we're up to the questions and answers section. So I'll be taking questions from the audience now.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really good presentation. So I have some questions, and I have someone questioning the overscheduling. So the question is this. So regarding the overscheduling, this individual is asking, did I understand you correctly that a child with a neurological disorder is more likely to respond better to overscheduling than a child without a disorder? Would you clarify that for me?
No, I didn't say neurological disorder. I was saying that, and I'm not saying that people should be overscheduled. I'm a staunch believer in structured scheduling and having a very proactive after-school extracurricular routine. And that's something that needs to be kind of balanced on a case-by-case basis. The literature is clear that extracurricular activities are good for children and their development. But you gotta find the balance, because sometimes if there's too many things and you find that there's not enough time to do homework, or your kid's stressed out and anxious, or you're stressed out and anxious, then you probably gotta pull some things back. Also, you got to question, why are you making your kid do this? If you really had dreams of being on the football team and you're making your kid play football, but they don't like football, then you might be doing it for the wrong reasons. You got to kind of question and check your motivations. What I had been saying before is that when I work with kids, specifically kids who have depression, anxiety, or ADHD, they tend to do better if they have more things on their calendar rather than less. I find in my practice, particularly with those disorders, not all those are psychiatric conditions, not neurological per se, like tics and Tourette's, but these are conditions that certainly when they have more free time on their hands, it tends to be much worse for them emotionally and socially, for kids who struggle with depression and anxiety in particular.
Okay, all right, thank you for clarifying that. So I have a question about that's about taking things away. So rather than take things away from your child for an infraction, what's your thinking on starting out with the basic essentials and then having them earn the extras? I mean, ultimately, those extras could be taken away if they needed to be, but I think this parent thinks that earning them has a more positive effect than taking away.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea. You can do the reward system an infinite number of ways. You could really carve it up. So there's no one size fits all recipe. You could try it where you just have like a basic level of privileges that they're going to get anyway, and then you just add extra special things into the mix, and really you got to just see how they respond. So a lot of it's like trial and error all the way. If your kids are really not that motivated to work extra hard for like the extra half hour of TV, then you might need to rework your system. It's really governed by what is meaningful, what's a meaningful incentive for your child. And that I can't answer. You have to explore that with them.
Okay. I have a question about anxiety and school refusals. So the question is, how can I handle anxiety that leads to school refusal in the moment? So if I understand the question correctly, the school refusal is not a diagnosed issue. More like, for some reason that day the kid won't get on the bus or won't get out of the car. So it's not every day, but it's enough that in that moment, how do you take care of that?
So that's a good question. I would recommend like a couple steps. The first step is to empathize and show empathy and validate how they're feeling. So if they're saying they don't want to go to school, I would say, I get that. Going to school is hard. When I was a kid, I didn't want to go to school a lot of times. So a lot of times I don't want to go to work. So I get that you don't want to go, and I'm really sorry that you're going through this right now. So the empathy shows that you understand and that you're validating that it's okay for them to feel that way. And once you validate it, then you kind of pivot and you say, however, we still need to go to school because school's really important. We need to learn. We need to grow. We need this in order to be our best selves. And you can play with the language depending on the age of the kid. And then lastly, the third step would be, what's something that you could do right now to help you through this moment, all right? So you're having a really tough time, Johnny, getting through this moment. What can you do? Can you think about something positive? Can you take deep breaths? Think about other coping skills. In therapy, a lot of what we do is introduce new coping skills, things that we do in order to help us feel better when we're struggling with anxiety or depression or something like that. So get them thinking about what they can do. I would recommend planning ahead for that part too. Like if you have a kid who's got this problem, talk to them in advance and say, I know you're gonna, you have this issue. Sometimes you don't want to go to school. What can you do next time you have that feeling of anxiety and you don't want to get on the bus? What's some coping skills you can use? And then really encourage them. Now, if you're doing a reward system as well, the way that can come into play is you could say, I really want to see you be brave and get on the bus and do what you've got to do. You can earn points for that. You can earn privilege time for that. I want to see you doing a really good job. I want to be proud of you. You could say all that stuff to try to coach them and urge them forward to push through the anxiety.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Have a question about a school that used a token system. And so this child, she's a smart girl, and she viewed it quickly as a negative reinforcement method. And if she couldn't hold it together, she knew that she would not earn the check. So she would get all stressed out if she thought she was going to be put in that situation. So how do you avoid this type of thing from kind of coming to a head?
Well, sometimes kids have that, and what I would say is you've got to set the bar very low. You've got to set the bar for catching your kid being good very low. You start with the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. If your kid is just walking in the right direction, you got to say, great job walking in the right direction. Great job following directions. You're getting a super check for that. You're eating, you're putting the fork in your mouth. You're getting super checks for that. You got to meet your kid where they're at. If a kid's got that kind of concern, my thinking is they got a lot of anxiety and stress, and they don't feel like they can do it. Maybe they've had a lot of negative experiences in the past, a lot of bad feedback in the past, and they're just lacking the confidence. So you've got to start as the parent doing this, like by really showing that they can do it, and by setting the bar very low, giving them praise and points for very easy stuff at first. And then as they get into the system and the days go by or the weeks go by, you could start gradually increasing your expectations and your demands. But you got to start by meeting them where they're at so that they feel like they can actually accomplish it.
Okay, all right. That's a great segue into another question that has to do with siblings. So this parent is saying that she has two boys, ages 10 and 8, who share a room. And it's complicated to discipline one without affecting the other. And, that anxiety question that you were just talking about earlier, it's almost like the same thing. Sometimes you keep rewarding and praising this kid for doing something relatively simple, and the sibling looks at that and says, hey, come on, I do that all the time, and you don't tell me how great I am, sort of thing. So that's a real balancing act in some families.
Yeah, well, if you have kids that are that close in age, you can use a similar system with both of them. A lot of times I'll have parents that are coming to see me, let's say I have one kid with an anxiety disorder and they have another kid in the house who's not afflicted with it. And they'll say, well, how do I do this system without involving the other? I say, you put them both on it, and you just tailor your expectations differently. So if there's certain things that are very hard for your first child, let's say like them going to the doctor's office or going to school is very hard for them because of their anxiety, you give them a lot of points for that. But you got to think about, for your other child, what are things that are uniquely challenging for them, and then you put points on that. You incentivize those things. So maybe for your other child, following directions may be harder for them, or being polite might be harder for them. So then you start focusing on that. Wherever you want to put your attention and the positive attributes you want to cultivate in your individual children, that's where you want to put the attention. So you can tailor it based on the needs and the abilities of the kids.
So using that, so you've got one child that's got some issues and another one that doesn't. You could recognize in the one that does not those attributes of not haranguing about the special attention that the child with the issues
Right,
seems
you
to
could
be
say you're
getting.
being very supportive. You're going to get points for
Mm.
being a supportive sibling, or you're being a good a good team player with the rest of the family. You're going to get points for that because you understand that your sibling has these challenges. But you can also identify things that that child needs to work on unique to them. Everybody has stuff they got to work on. Everybody has things they can improve. So you could always find those goals and then start focusing on that with the other kids to help make everyone feel like they're working on something together.
Okay, all right, thank you. Here's a kind of unusual question. So my husband is estranged from his parents, and he talks negatively about them in front of our twins, who are 5. Now, the mom is saying that she has said that he shouldn't do that, and the dad says that the kids are too young to understand. And so she's looking for some comment from you on that.
I would
So
advise,
setting the
yeah, I
kind
mean,
of example that's
yeah,
really
I
not
would,
good. Yeah.
I mean, I would recommend against talking about that kind of thing in front of the kids. If you have issues, I mean, just for no other reason, but those are adult level concerns and issues that are going to be beyond the kids' comprehension. They may hear pieces of it and it may scare them. Like, what do you
Mm-hmm.
mean you don't talk to them, or you never see them again, or, they're your own parents and you don't, have any relationship with them. They may just hear pieces of it and then they can go in different directions with it. That's why we recommend not talking about that kind of stuff in their presence. Same with, like, you wouldn't talk to them about, sexual issues or other things, or drugs if they're way beyond what their level of comprehension, because you don't want them just picking up certain words and kind of running with it or repeating it to their friends or getting the information from someone else. So the safer and more conservative way to go is just to keep that for parent time talk, behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm. Now, in some families, I mean, I've never felt it was a bad thing for kids to see parents argue. I'm not talking about, a knockdown fight. I don't mean that. But to disagree on something so that a kid can witness how you solve the problem. So they witness a disagreement that is something that parents sit down and talk about and resolve, and then it goes away. And I think that's a good example for kids to be part of. Or am I wrong on that?
I agree, as long as it's a civil argument in which there is a problem solving process. A lot of
There's
times,
a
to be honest,
solution.
it doesn't. Right, as long
Yeah,
as
there's
there's
a
a solution.
solution. Yeah.
I guess the guidelines are the two parties treating each other with respect, and is there a resolution? Now, if that isn't happening, I would refrain from yelling and cursing at your spouse and ending the fight without any resolution. That's certainly unhealthy for kids to be around for obvious reasons.
Okay, but the idea that you have to have every discussion away from the kids, that might,
No,
it never made sense to me as a
it's not
parent.
realistic. It's not
I
realistic, but
know, it's not
it
real.
is important to try your best. You're gonna have disagreements with your spouse. It's inevitable. And they're gonna happen in front of the kids sometimes. But you got to do it as long as you're doing it respectfully, without making toxic comments towards each other, without
Hmm.
hostility and contempt towards each other, and as long as there's a path towards resolution, then I think it's acceptable.
Okay, we've gone over a little bit. I'm going to do one more question and then we'll
Sure.
wrap it up.
Okay.
Um, you you hear the expression helicopter parenting a lot. So how much of a problem do you think that really is in terms of parents being able to back off and let their kids be kids?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So that's another hot topic in the parenting blog world and in parenting magazines. And the helicopter parenting thing is problematic insofar as this concept of grit and resilience. If you're not allowing your child to experience adversity, if you're not allowing them to experience the metaphorical skinned knee, the injury that's not going to have any serious damaging effect, if you're preventing them from experiencing challenges and you're giving them this bubble wrapped life, they're not going to develop the internal resources that are necessary in order to persevere in the world independently. So that's where it does a disservice. Tends to be a bigger problem among upper middle class professional families, where there is maybe parents who are very competitive and they're really pushing their kids to succeed, very achievement oriented, and they feel like they need to give their kid every advantage, and sometimes they just take it too far, and in giving them every advantage, they're also preventing them from experiencing adversity, and that has a counteracting effect. So I don't think this is like the biggest problem in the world of child mental health right now. There are far bigger fish to fry, but this is certainly something that, people should be aware of.
Okay, then with that, I'm going to end the Q&A. Thank you very much. Really informative presentation. I'm going to turn this back to Kelly to do a wrap-up.
Hey, thank you all for joining our webinar on Parent Power. There is an exit survey which we need everyone attending to fill out. The webinar blog is now open and available for the next 7 days on the NJCTS website for any additional questions that were not covered in tonight's presentation. That website is www.njcts. Also, an archived recording of tonight's webinar will be posted to the website. Our next presentation, Grief and Loss, Handling Expectations, will be presented by Jesse Bassett and is scheduled for December 6, 2017. This ends tonight's webinar. Thank you, Dr. Mizrael, for your presentation, and thank you everyone for attending. Don't forget to set your clocks back on Saturday night. Good evening.